And next on our program, we got Mark Young. There's Mark. Yeah, he's ready, I think. Just a very quick introduction. He's a consultant and housing developer. He studied and became familiar with monetary systems. While in graduate school, studying urban planning and economics. He's the author of How to Fix the Future, a book still available at Amazon. That book outlines the structure of the global monetary system and the benefits of restructuring it. He's also co-editor with me and contributor to the recent Spanish anthology Democratizar el Dinero. Sorry guys, my Spanish is not that good. Una introducción a la reforma del dinero soberano, democratizing money, an introduction to sovereign monetary reform. We'll hear from the translator of that project, Jesus Huaste, who will be later on. Mark will be discussing the idea to file a complaint at the United Nations about human rights violations caused by the current international monetary regime. And that sounds so good it's almost too good to be true that we could do that. But it's a very nice, expensive, in their face saying, guys, come on, something is wrong, we have to address it. Mark, welcome, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you.
We can hear you.
Good. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a quick presentation just so we're all on the same page. But just in brief, this came about, I had just noticed somebody had made a complaint to the UN regarding some type of human rights violations, and I was interested in it. And so I started looking around, and then I realized that there were actually, under the Human Rights Convention, there's a covenant on economics, social, and cultural convention. And once I read through it, I realized that a lot of the issues that they discuss in those conventions directly relate to a lot of the benefits that we say can come from monetary reform. And so let me go through that, and we can start from there. Okie dokie. Can everybody see that? Is that okay?
Yes, yes, it's great.
So monetary reform in the United Nations Human Rights Council, and this is specific to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. They have a lot of different covenants. Some are on human rights as far as how people are treated. Some are on women's rights. You've heard of covenants on everything from landmines to everything else. And so this follows in that same path, but it's very interesting in some of the things that these countries have signed off on. And so the goals of just us discussing this are pretty simple. I am not going to pretend that I'm some writer who can write a 500-page book with a bunch of citations, and I'm not going to act like I know everything that there is to know. So really the goal of this would be to find people who are interested in creating an ad hoc committee to further study the complaint process, which nation states should be included, establish complaints and draft a complaint. And then to also file a complaint with the UN Human Rights Council based on the International Covenant. Those are the simple goals of this presentation. So a little background. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights was adopted and opened for signature and ratification and accession by the General Assembly in 1966 and was actually put into force in 1976. So it's something that's actually been around for a long time. Now, when I learned this also, that there's a process that the UN, they may create these things, but until people sign off on an optional protocol, it really doesn't have any effect. Nobody can study it. Nobody can bring in a defendant or file a complaint against it. Well, it just so happens that it's been open for signature all these years, and on December 10th, 2008, the optional protocol was adopted. The signatories to the optional protocol, I'm sorry, the signature process was opened in 2009. And as of May 2013, there are 45 signatures and 25 parties. The signatories would be a nation, a party might be a territory or something like that, somebody else that agrees to go along with the protocols. So what is a optional protocol? It gives individuals and groups the right to complain to the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Violations to the convention. This procedure is known as the communication procedure. The United Nations communication procedures provide the right to petition and the right to complain about violations of rights under all procedures. Then what these protocols allow the committee to do is actually conduct inquiries and basically investigate what it is you're complaining about. And then they will issue a report later. They don't have to issue a report, but they have to give a reason why. And so a reason why you might not have standing, or it's not, your complaint may not fit into what they feel that the economic, social, and cultural violations are. That's the hard process of writing the complaint, is tying those those conventions to an actual document and tying it to the monetary reform. That's the difficult part, and that's the part that we need to consider. So who are these signatories? As you can see, there are 45 or more than 45 signatures, but there are some big names obviously that you don't see on here, and there's a reason for that. I would imagine you don't see the United States, you don't really see, besides France, you don't really see any of the major economic powers. And I think there's a reason for that, and it's probably a well thought out reason, is that they don't want to deal with complaints regarding some of these things that I'll go over later, because they just don't want to take the time to respond to it or anything else. So these are all the countries and everything else. France is on here, which is interesting. Spain is on here. Italy, places where we actually have member organizations to the IMMR, the International Movement for Monetary Reform. So I don't want to read all this for you guys, and so I'm going to try to just scan over it until I get to the stuff that I think is the most important. But this is what the preamble says to it. And it just recognizes that some people have a right to certain freedoms and certain ways of life. It's similar to our Bill of Rights in a sense. But those, and I'll make this presentation available later on if you want to read it in detail, but I won't waste you guys' time reading to you. So, but I will read these particular articles because I think they are important. All people have this is Article 1, and there are several articles. I didn't include all of them. I only included the articles that I thought that could be relative in some way to monetary reform. All peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. All peoples may, for their own ends, freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic cooperation based on the principles of mutual benefit and international law. In no case may people be deprived of their own means of subsistence. The state parties to the present covenant, including those having responsibility for administration of the non-self-governing trust territories, shall promote the realization of the rights of self-determination and shall respect that right in conformity with the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations. Article 2, each state party to the present covenant undertakes to take steps individually and through international assistance and cooperation, especially economic and technical, to the maximum of its available resources with a view of achieving progressively the full realization of the rights recognized in the present covenant by all appropriate means, including particularly the adoption of legislative measures. So this is saying that nation states need to be concerned about these things and they need to take action on them. The states parties to the present covenant undertake to guarantee that the rights enunciated in the present covenant will be exercised without discrimination of any kind as to race, color, sex, language, religion, political or any other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Developing countries with due regard to human rights and their national economy may determine to what extent they would guarantee the economic rights recognized in the present covenant to non-nationals. Article 6, so I jump ahead here because these are the relevant articles to me. The state parties to the present covenant recognize the right to work, which includes the right of everyone to the opportunity to gain his living by work, which he freely chooses or accepts, and will take appropriate steps to safeguard this right. That could be ensuring that people have work, whether it's a guaranteed job, but I think it also plays into the bust boom cycles that we discussed under the current system and how the possibility of those can infringe on this right for everyone, because one of the things, when we see a bust, what do we have? We have massive unemployment and things like that. The steps to be taken by a state party to the present covenant to achieve the full realization of this right shall include technical and vocational guidance and training programs, policies and techniques to achieve steady economic, social, and cultural development and full and productive employment under conditions safeguarding fundamental political and economic freedoms to the individual. That sounds a lot like the stuff we talk about in the abstract, not necessarily about the three prongs or anything like that. Article 7, the state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to the enjoyment of just and favorable conditions of work, which ensure in particular, a remuneration which provides all workers as a minimum with fair wages and equal remuneration for work of equal value without distinction of any kind. In particular, women being guaranteed conditions of work not inferior to those enjoyed by men with equal pay for equal work. A decent living for themselves and their families in accordance with the provisions of the present covenant. Safe and healthy working conditions, equal opportunity for everyone to be promoted in his employment to an appropriate high level, subject to no considerations other than those of seniority and competence. Rest, leisure, and reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay, as well as remuneration for public holidays. Now, think of this that was an interesting one for me, because if you think about these last couple ones, and let's say you're China, for example, China or Taiwan or places like that have these huge sweatshops where they pay people $1 a day. That's why they didn't sign off on this. You know, when you think about things like that, is a reason why you don't see their names on those list of signatories. Article 9, the state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to Social Security, including social insurance. The state parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family. An adequate standard of living goes back to some of your parity conversations, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. The state parties will take appropriate steps to ensure the realization of this right, recognizing to this effect the essential importance of international cooperation based on free consent. The state parties to the present covenant, recognizing the fundamental right of everyone to be free from hunger, shall take individually and through international cooperation the measures including specific programs which are needed to improve methods of production, conservation, and distribution of food by making full use of technical and scientific knowledge, by disseminating knowledge to the principles of nutrition, and by developing or reforming agrarian systems in such a way as to achieve the most efficient development and utilization of natural resources. Taking into account the problems of both food importing and food exporting countries to ensure an equitable distribution of world food supplies in relation to need. 13, the state parties present to this covenant recognize the right of everyone to education. They agree that education shall be directed to the full development of human personality and the sense of its dignity, and shall strengthen the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. They further agree that education shall enable all persons to participate effectively in a free society, promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations and all racial, ethnic, and religious groups. They further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. The state parties to this present covenant recognize with a view to achieving the full realization of this right, primary education shall be compulsory and available free to all. That's not true. That doesn't happen in the world today. It does happen in some places. Secondary education in all its different forms, including technical and vocation, secondary education, shall be made generally available and accessible. Whoops, sorry about that. Generally available and accessible to all and by every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive introduction of free education. Higher education shall be made equally accessible to all on the basis of capacity by every appropriate means, and in particular by the progressive introduction of free education. Fundamental education shall be encouraged or intensified as far as possible for those that have not received or completed a whole period of their primary education. The development of a system of schools at all levels shall be actively pursued. An adequate fellowship system that shall be established, and the material condition of teaching staff shall be continuously improved. The state parties to this present covenant undertake to have respect for the liberty of parents, and when applicable, leading guardians to choose for their children's schools other than those established by the public authorities, which conform to such minimum educational standards as may be laid down or approved by the state, and to ensure that the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own convictions. So these are the discussion points. How do we tie monetary reform to the failure of the articles in the ICE, which is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Conventions? Do we need to present an alternative to the current system, or is pointing to the current debt system as the cause enough? Which signatory nations make the most sense to be a complainant or individual that lives in that place? And what outcomes are we seeking from the Human Rights Council? Let's look at the last one first. Very similar to the way I see what the outcome could be. Is very similar to what Joe is talking about with the National Monetary Commission. Is that is really more of a placement of fact, right? It's very difficult to get published. And for Nick was talking about how economics classes don't teach stuff, and there's economics magazines don't publish stuff. Well, if we can have a successful complaint at the human rights regarding this, targeting the monetary system, and even if we do provide an alternative, or just pointing out how the current debt system is the cause, and don't necessarily point to an alternative beyond the use of sovereign money. I don't think it has to be that specific. To me, that's an achievement. And I think that gives us the ability not only to have that as kind of like a stakeholder in the ground, but it also gives us the ability to go to these countries, the countries that are not economic powerhouses, where sovereign money reform will mean even more than it would mean to a country like the United States or some of the other economic powers. The people who have huge poverty rates, who have 40%, 50% unemployment, the countries that have serious hunger and starvation problems. This can be enough for them to say, well, what is this and why aren't we doing this? Which to me is an important thing. It's one of the reasons why we participated in the anthology that Gobo was talking about. Which signatory nations? I'm not sure. It could be France, it could be Italy. Does it make sense to do one? We already have a monetary reform presence in that nation. No question about it. And then how do we tie monetary reform to the failure of the articles? I think a lot of you guys could do that with no problem. To me, that seems like the low-hanging fruit, but to actually document it is something else. The process for a complaint is they have an application actually for a complaint. You have to name who the complainant is, whether or not it's an individual, whether or not it's an organization. You can do it on behalf of other nations. They are also allow you to submit a 50-page document explaining and elaborating on your complaint. So a couple of big things are, obviously we couldn't do this. We couldn't complain against the United States because they're not a signatory to this. But any of those nations that I showed you could be. And so if we knew somebody in Ghana, we could actually write one for Ghana. Now, the question is, how do we get the economic information about a particular location that makes it relevant to that location? Or do we talk about it at a higher level? I'm not sure, quite honestly. But that's my presentation, and I'll stop here and we can discuss or move on or whatever. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. There was a question indeed about whether Canada or the United States were signatories, but they're not. I saw the Netherlands as a signatory, and they have been generally very activist on the international scene of organizations. So we can talk with Onslaught about what they're doing. Mm-hmm. My question is, did you find any complaints already made? And looking in those, what we might learn from that.
Yes.
Is there probably there's a bureaucratic trail?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's
a long bureaucratic trail somewhere.
They actually produce a report every year on everybody who filed a complaint, what the outcome was. They even have a spreadsheet that shows the ones that were denied and gives a reason for why. But I would say that most of these complaints are very, very specific. They are not global in nature. So they're not monetary systems. They may say that a signatory did something wrong in a particular instance, and so someone might file a complaint to this group. They may say, "Hey, well, I'm not getting the fair pay I should get because I'm a woman, and these guys are doing that." And they may not have, like we hear in the United States, a court system that allows them to move that case along, right? And so they'll take it to the human rights. The human rights will file, they will review it. They will actually give you a response. And that response could be, yes, we agree with you. And this nation, let's just say Ghana again, you need to change that. Now, whether or not they change it is a whole different procedure. But you do have something on the record that says that you were right and that they were wrong and stuff like that.
Joe Stack.
Joe, go ahead.
Well, what I'm wondering is, you mentioned, like in our country, we have all these rules and everything, is whether they would entertain a complaint if an administrative remedy, whether it's legal or what, type, is available in the country, so that, well, you could have done that at home or whatever.
Right.
Administrative remedy.
Yes, it actually does talk about that. Is there a remedy in your nation state for this, and did you pursue that? So that is a part of it. Okay. So that would have to be an argument that says, yes, I've tried to pursue it, and we would have to discuss to a particular country. That's the hard part about it, is knowing what's available in a particular country. So it always would help to have someone from a country involved in the preparation of the complaint, because they know that system the best. But yes, you're right. They do say, it does say in there that if you have an administrative cure, have you tried to do that yet?
I still have a question also from the chat. You addressed it a little bit, but why did the US and Canada not participate in this? And on the other side, we have countries like Spain and France and the Netherlands and some other OECD countries that might have similar interest globally. They did sign on, but not Canada and the US. Did you find anything about the process ever in the State Department or something about discussions about signing on or not?
The only thing I read is that the state has to go by whatever internal process they have for signing treaties and being signatories to any type of international agreement. So my guess is in the United States, it would never get through all three bodies of Congress. And so if you had, maybe if you had a progressive president, a progressive House, and a progressive Senate, maybe it would get signed. But here we can't do that in this country. I don't know how other countries work, and I don't even know how Canada works, quite honestly. But my guess is that one of the holdups is that it would have to get through all types of roadblocks in our representative government. And two, if they did sign to it and someone was successful making a complaint, what liability does that open up to the federal government? We have obviously a very litigious society, and so if somebody got that, could they then sue the United States? And so, once you get lawyers involved and they say something about liability, and things can get bogged down really quickly.
Well, maybe in a couple of months, we got the right Senate and the right House and the right president, where in the process of, recuperating the US international role, we might find out, who are the activists in Congress to take on such ideas and roles. I think probably it's usually in the Senate that things like this happen, because they are the ultimate ratifiers of these kinds of international. It's probably a national treaty. That's the status, I would say. Yeah. So I see some hope.
Could be. I mean, that would be good. It would be good if we could, be a complaint to the United States, since we are the reserve currency and we kind of run this system for all practical purposes. But I'm not looking to that as the first step. I think it may be a country that's already a signatory, that's already put itself out there to be complained about. So
yeah. As far as the history of this, how would you call it? A international protocol? It's not
called a covenant. They call it a covenant.
Covenant. Okay. So a few suggestions were made that its roots might have been in maybe in the Economic Bill of Rights of Roosevelt, or the Human Rights Human Rights Declaration, in which Mrs. Roosevelt was involved in. Did you see something about the history?
I did not see anything about that. The only history I read was when it was adopted initially by the entire UN, which was in 1966, and it was ratified by the UN in 1976. I don't know where they got it from. That could very well be true. I just don't know. I didn't see it.
And of course, the cost-benefit question. What would you hope the outcome would be, such that it would be worth our effort?
Well, I think, in my viewpoint, the benefit way to the cost of actually putting something like this together would be that we have a document that says we're right, and that can be used in itself to convince people that may not take monetary reform serious, think it's a bit kooky, say, look, the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations reviewed this. And they said that, yes, this monetary system does whatever the complaint would be, if they can verify that, whether it's saying that our current credit debt system and lack of sovereign money does cause all these problems. But it can go in a lot of different ways. I mean, you can look at it, like I was saying, the boom bust cycles. You can look at it, the lack of being able to provide living wages in that country because of the credit debt system, and the ability for countries not to provide, or the lack of the ability to provide educational opportunities because they don't have the money to do it, and they're not, because everything is for profit. If you don't have the money, or you can't borrow money, you can't do these things. And so to me, that ties directly to the monetary system. Whereas if a nation had sovereign money, they could provide educational resources, they could build schools, they could build universities, they could ensure living wages and a job guarantee and those type of things. So that, to me, that would be the benefit, is actually having a document that confirms that that's an international document. And like I said, I think the other benefit is that if you have that, you could, I doubt if the 100 and however many 49 nation or 90 something nations, whatever it is at the United Nations, I'm sure all of them don't know about monetary reform. But if you have a report by the Human Rights Commission that confirms a complaint, then maybe you can get those leaders who would actually benefit the most from monetary reform to take a second look and say, well, hey, why are we doing this? And, I know the United States is the big guy on the block, and they're telling us we have to. But what if we start pulling together and at the same time continue our activities in country in the United States and showing people that this is not necessarily going to hurt anyone and that it can provide help to people.
Mark, I just had a follow-up question that I really appreciate your answer to that, but your first answer was that, you know, they agree that we're right. And so my follow-up was, what if they respond, no, you know, the monetary system is not the cause of all the problems. Do they, in the processes, do they have to defend their ruling, or can they just say, no, you haven't convinced us? And
well, you know what, it's an interesting process, because you basically, what happens is you file a complaint. If they decide to review that complaint, you actually have the opportunity, I think, are required to appear in front of the United Nations and make your argument. And the state or whatever, whoever's the person you're complaining against, also has to provide someone to defend their position. And so I can't say, you know, if obviously if it didn't work out and the Human Rights Commission said, no, this has nothing to do with it, then I'm assuming they would say that. But I think our confidence has to be that we know we're right, and and that we would be successful in our argument, because I think our arguments are strong. Is Gover still on here? I seen somebody raising their hand. I think it was Joe Polito.
Oh yeah, Joe Polito. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, Gover got bumped off. I didn't see that. But
You have to unmute yourself, Joe Polito.
Hi. So I just want to expand on the President Roosevelt part.
Mm-hmm.
He proposed in 1944 an economic bill of rights. He wanted to make it constitutional. And that would really, that was a great presentation, Mark, and that would really support what you were talking about. An economist that was connected with him was named Sadie Alexander. She was the first African-American economist. And she proposed basically what we would call a job guarantee. And Roosevelt was quite connected with this idea. She went on to influence Martin Luther King, and some of his policies were affected by her. She worked with Mrs. Roosevelt as well to help make the UN Declaration of Human Rights happen. So it's a great strategy, Mark. And unfortunately, Roosevelt died 76 years ago and didn't get to move that bill, as it would certainly be facilitated by monetary reform.
That's interesting. I certainly did not know that.
Joe, can you repeat that economist's name?
Sadie Alexander. There's a Professor Nina Banks who has been profiling her. Nina Banks. She'd probably be a good guest for the coffee house or something. He understood that the best way to help everybody was with full employment, true full employment, and that it was even better for marginalized communities. So it was a great strategy on her part. She was a very smart lady. I think she also went on to get a law degree.
Well, I'm not looking at anything, but are there any other questions, or we can certainly move on? I think we're behind anyway, right? Or close to it. I'm not sure.
if this video is helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe for new video notifications. Please consider donating at monetary.org/donate. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter at AMI Monetary or on our website